Good morning, afternoon, and evening.
Hey, Alex.
Hey, like a list of my favorite people. Cool. Thanks for submitting that PR or that issue, Andy. It was were there any updates from that, or I didn't see any movement on it?
It's been approved, and the next step was someone has to create a service desk ticket. I thought Josh was maybe going to do that, but I don't know. Let me see.
I know he had a family some family time scheduled for today, so
Yeah. But this was like 2 days ago. Nikita said to create a ticket.
very exciting. I guess I was naive in thinking that GitHub issues were service desk tickets for the CNCF. I guess that's something else.
Um, yeah, I don't know.
And sorry, I I think these meetings usually are best kicked off about 5 minutes in to give people time to filter in from their previous meetings. So excuse the banter, the introductory banter.
It says that a tag lead has to open a ticket.
Who gave the really good? Somebody gave a really good intro to the working group last week or last meeting, and I think it was Steve. I don't think he's here yet, or I'm not sure if he's going to be here. Um, okay. Well, if we're all okay to kick off, then I would propose that we get started here. I see a nod. All right. Okay, so I think it was helpful in the last meeting to kick off the meeting by just doing a quick introduction to the working group, the concept, why we're here. Because I think there are a couple new faces here. So I mean, just really real quickly, this working group is still in its infancy. We've recently gotten our charter approved under the CNCF tag app delivery. And let's see here. I'm hoping that the charter is in the, yes, it's in the meeting notes here. So if you're unfamiliar with why we're here, then that is in the meeting notes. And I know that was an underwhelming introduction to the concept. So if anybody has anything to enhance that with, I would welcome. Okay. So I put in the meeting notes here. I think our first agenda item would be intros. So if there's any new attendees to this meeting, to the working group who'd like to introduce themselves, the work that they're currently engaged in, or what their why this work might be important or beneficial to them, we reserve this time at the beginning of the meetings for those introductions. So if there's any new attendees, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can go. Yeah, so I'm new to the working group. My name is Ridwan Hawk. I am an employee at Microsoft. I'm working on a Microsoft Artifact Registry, which is Microsoft's OCI artifact registry solution for Microsoft's public artifacts. So as a result, I'm interested to some degree about how the WT Artifacts working group is going to kind of move this topic along. So they actually sent me an invite to this at some point. So that's why yeah, happy to be here and interested in what you guys are doing.
It's awesome to have I know Microsoft's doing a great job of moving artifacts, like you said, progressing the concept. So it's great to have you here. Thank you. And then were there any other? Anybody else? Okay. If there's no other intros, go ahead.
So Alex, so the first thing, right? So are all the admin tasks taken care of for this meeting? That's the first thing. Like we can get that out of the way.
Yeah, somebody put contribute to tag website and monthly update. I'm not sure what that is. I don't know if that's from somebody from the tag put that on there. But that was one item before the admin items. Does anybody know where that agenda item came from?
Contribute to tag website and monthly update.
As a working group, is there an expectation that we're submitting some update to the tag, or I haven't heard about that previously. If anybody has any more information about that.
Yeah, this is something I think Josh would know. We can ask it. That's okay. So okay, so this meeting, I think that's all. Go ahead, Alex.
What was that, Ram?
No, anything else you wanted to add? Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh no, I think if we don't know that one, we can ask Josh about that, and then like you're suggesting, jump into tag app delivery issue 417 here in the notes. Did you want to kick that off, Ram?
No. Okay, let me see. Let me just pull this up. Okay, so just going over the items here. So I elect 2 chairs to manage the working group. So what do we do with this?
I think based on what Josh was saying is if there's any dissent, then that needs to be addressed. If there's no dissent, then I think the intent was to use this session to either decide yes or no on either of us. So I guess the question to this group is there any dissent to the election of myself or Ram as the working group chairs?
Yeah, so the issues are there. So go ahead and consent or dissent. Go ahead and add your comments there if you have any.
And I think Josh had put today was, I guess, like the day that he wanted to wrap that specific effort up so that we could, because we have other issues in this list that are dependent on that too.
Doesn't sound like there's dissents. It seems like a vote to move forward.
Is there, um, since we are a new organization, who is sort of I guess, what's the voting system that we're using for this? I want to make sure that we just do things sort of by the book if CNCF has some sort of policy for like what does quorum consist of?
I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. I can tell you that this is not the process I've seen in other elections. Like,
I've seen a couple different systems being used in the past, more electronic ones. It can be done asynchronously, which is what I would like. I'm not a huge fan of having, elections during a meeting that maybe not everyone can attend. I forget what's the one that I'm thinking of. There's at least one that I've seen work well that other groups are using. Does anyone happen to know a name of one of the election systems offhand? I can look it up, but if anyone knows offhand, that'd be great.
Yeah, the name escapes me right now. I think we're not holding an election here on the call. It's the election's been out for these two have been out for what, a week or two. It's more a matter of, and I think we set a date for this meeting too. So I think the election process certainly makes sense, as we get going. For incremental, I think it's always the question and the bootstrapping.
OPA vote is the one that I've used in the past. OPA vote. Actually, I believe the open SSF uses.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we dotted our I's and cross our T's here. Because I think when bootstrapping an org, it's a little bit confusing sort of who the members are that are voting.
I try not to even have a voice in this because like my name's in the hat. So I'm trying to abstain from really even any input on this. I'm kind of touching on the experience of the people here and that are collaborating on these issues to kind of provide that guidance, because I don't really want to I don't really want to have an input on this.
No, that's fair. That's why I was kind of chiming in, because I guess Josh wasn't able to make it. I think we've reserved the third spot for some future. So I think that's where there's always the question of how do you bootstrap something versus as the process is started and as there's a group in place, how do you vote for incremental? So I mean, we've had it out for 2 weeks. I think the question is, how do we actually get started with the work as opposed to caught up in the initial, and there was no dissents, there's no concerns raised.
Yeah, I mean, if CNCF is okay with Robert's rules, then unanimous consent is, of course, a way you can do things, right? And we've got unanimous consent right now. There's been no dissent on these nominations.
And it's been out for, let's see, how long have they been out? 2 weeks?
Mm-hmm.
2 weeks ago for that one.
Is Josh on this call? I guess I don't. I have
He's
the
on
gallery up.
He's on vacation.
Okay.
I'm reading Brandon's comment.
Yeah, I think maybe we should. I guess it's so funny because we don't have chairs. And Josh is out. I feel like the tag that help form the WG would be the one to sort of sign off on like there's been unanimous consent or something like that. So if someone wants to tag Josh and say, by unanimous consent, can we close and consider this merged and done?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
that's probably okay for the initial setup. Definitely in the future, we should use a software-based voting system for future elections.
I'll reply to both of the nominations and tag Josh, just asking for us to consider this approved by unanimous consent.
Thank you. Thanks for taking that up for action. So I can keep moving through this list here. The README was merged, and then there's another update to the README that's dependent on the elections or the nominations. So that's the website will be addressed once the restructuring is completed. I think there was somebody wanted us to add this information during the restructuring, but I think it was determined that was going to be kind of messy. I think this one's on hold. And then I think from the list, see here, Andy, you have an update on this one. We were kind of chatting about it at the beginning of the meeting. I didn't know if you wanted to. I think some more people have joined.
Yes, so the request to create the repository for WG artifacts in the CNCF tags GitHub organization has been approved by everyone who needed to approve it. And the next step is that somebody who has an account in the CNCF service desk, which I do not, needs to go through the service desk and request creating the repository. So when Josh gets back, we can see if he has that access. I did look, it looks like anybody who's listed as a maintainer of various CNCF projects should have accounts, and there's like a big page that's got people's names on it. So I think let's just wait until Josh gets back and then see if he can get that created.
Sounds good.
Okay, so this item is waiting on Josh. Okay.
And for this last item, I wasn't trying to put the cart before the horse, but I was just trying to take some administrative overhead off of Josh's plate. So I submitted the code owners PR, but I put a dependency on the 428, so that's not, the code owners aren't updated until the elections are completed. So I've linked the PR that I submitted for the code owners at the to this issue. I think the link is visible towards the bottom. Now, I think there's another question with the code owners. Is that just limited to chairs? Because that would just be two people, or do we want other members represented in the code owners file so they can help move things along? I don't know what the official if anybody has some insights into that process,
I would
that'd be welcome.
think you can add. I would think you can add more than just the chairs, mainly because you don't want to get stuck in a situation where you need two approvals and you only have two people listed there.
Okay. Now how do we propose other code owners under that directory?
I would imagine that once you have code owners in place, any changes to that file, the existing owners can approve, but in the absence of a bootstrapped file, like it would probably just be up to whoever has permission in the repo to merge, whether that's code owners up above or folks with write access. So I imagine it's probably not too onerous to identify somebody.
Might
I
leave
guess
it up
I
to-
was. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Excuse me.
I was going to say, might leave it up to just the chairs to give a initial set of seeds for that list.
I'm
So
sure we
what
could
do-
go back and go ahead. Sorry. Excuse me.
No, sorry. I mean, yeah. I mean, what do other projects do? So that is something that we can follow as well. Okay, I guess we'll find out.
This a lot of this is probably a question for the tag app delivery, since they're above the working group. And so if they've got policies for how they do their working groups, someone over there might be the one to answer that question.
And Josh has already I spoke to him about this and he asked that that I guess this is going to go to Ram and I, that we increase our participation membership within the larger tags so that we can not rely on Josh for all this and be able to proxy this information. So that's going to be, my calendar is you got to add those meetings to my calendar, which I haven't done. So it's coming. Okay. So I think unless anybody has any questions about this, I think that with Aaron's action on the voting, I think that's about all we can do in this session towards this objective. So if there's unless there's any other questions, we could proceed to the next agenda item, Ram.
Can you see this? Let me stop share. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, we can see the agendas being shared right now.
Okay. All right. So that's out of the way. So now the meat of the matter, the technical questions. So I had put a few questions together while I was discussing with, let's see, with so let me just pull this up. So as I see it, actually there are 3 large ecosystems at play here. If you want to, depending on how big the scope needs to be. So the 3 ecosystems are: one, there is the Kubernetes ecosystem. The other ecosystem is the non-Kubernetes container ecosystem, whatever that is. And then the third one is a non-container, non-Kubernetes ecosystem. So an example is in the Kubernetes ecosystem, we have the Helm charts and things like that as the artifacts. That's what they would call artifacts. In the container and potentially non-Kubernetes ecosystem, where you have the Dockers and things like that. So we have the OCA artifacts there. And the third one is we don't care about the Kubernetes or the container. So this is things like the npm registries, the Red Hat package managers, and things of that nature. So they don't care about any of the other stuff, right? So these are the three areas where software is being produced. These are the three silos, I would say, because they are silos because they don't talk to each other. The workflows are not identical. So the software is being produced and software is being consumed, but across all these silos, the problems are universal. That we have the issue of software provenance, who is producing what is in there, and who is consuming, and at the point where it is being consumed, is it being consumed in a trusted and safe manner? So the question now is at least narrowing the scope a little bit between the Kubernetes silos and the container silos. So the first question to ask is 1A, which is it okay? So if you have a registry in there, or let's say it's a OCI registry in the Kubernetes ecosystem, because you have to pull and push images from there, is it okay for folks to use that OCI registry to store and retrieve their artifacts? If the answer is no, then we ask the question whether they want to continue using their infrastructure. Right. So the output of all this work is, are there a bunch of common APIs that we need to bring out? Are there a bunch of common workflows that we need to bring out? Are there a bunch of common tooling that needs to come out across these different silos? So that's I think the overall overarching question, actually. So that's the way I would think about it. Now coming back to this particular, sorry, Steve.
No, I think it's good. I think you kind of framed it in a way that I don't think you're saying it's one or the other. I think it's a combination of both, where there is existing ecosystems for obviously the container ecosystem and the work that people have been putting in other artifacts into their registries, and then there's the existing package managers, and there's many of them out there, and we want to be able to support the ability to query across all those, because that's where software is stored. I think what we're hoping to do is enable people to focus on not having to ship new package managers, because it just becomes more problematic. Can they use one of the existing ones? If the NPM community has an ecosystem, if somebody is tied more to the NPM community and that works for their infrastructure, by all means use it. From a software perspective, how do we enable a way to find content across the various package managers is one of the working groups that I think we're working on. One of the portions of it.
Okay, Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, so when we say new package manager or existing package manager, what exactly does that mean? Because I think what we're kind of skirting between here is like a data defined system where that package manager's existing schema is expressed within the constructs of OCI or something similar to that, or are we saying that we're just going to continue leveraging the systems implementation of that with their existing APIs? Maybe that's my question as we talk about this: is what is the package manager? Is it the data, or is it their taxonomy, or is it in their schema, or is it their APIs? I have my own biased opinion on that, but I'll just leave that question.
It's probably all of the above, in my opinion.
It's both. It has to be both, because you have to, in most cases, one is a contract for the other.
Yep. Yeah, I think they tie together. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I'm done.
I think they tie together in that so there's two parts to it, right? There's what I think of to answer your question is the package manager. There's a bunch of package managers that are out there already, right? People are storing things in NPMs, NuGets, RPMs, Maven, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of them that are out there. Most of them are more proprietary to a particular area, particular tech, where the stuff we did around OCI artifacts was, hey, there's this infrastructure that is highly invested in for production resources. Can we maybe standardize in that for new types? So as Pulumi comes out with a thing that they want to ship, that they can store them in, the existing registers, and they don't have the burden of creating another package manager. Then, so that's just the base. Because if we can establish that stable base, then we can do two things. One, if we understand what the package format is for each one of those without radically changing them, then if we had, and this is just one of the sub areas we've been talking about in this work group artifacts, is how do you search across them? I think the way they tie together is if you have an API that says, hey, I want to search for things beyond just the name and version, right? That's kind of like the basics. Can I find packages with this name that have this particular version, this version range, which would be a nice addition to OCI. The next question is, what about the contents within that package? That's where it starts to get really interesting with what you've been thinking about, Alex, is the persistence format across those done in such a way that if Andy comes up with another package type, that the registries don't need to know about his package type. That format already has a way to express properties that can get indexed that a search API could benefit from. So they're, from a search perspective, they're fairly tied together. And can we work across the existing ecosystems to make it so valuable that somebody doesn't feel they have to create yet another package manager and ask the various cloud providers and products to host?
Kyle, I don't know who had their hand up first, but
Things Zoom is saying you do.
Okay. So I think that, and I'm just kind of throwing considerations out there, right? Like I'm trying to come at this without my preconceived notions about how these things work, but it's just questions I have as we go through this. With Pulumi or the next package manager, I think they're going to still have their domain specific annotations and taxonomy that need to be expressed. I don't think we're going to be able to come up with a general package manager. I think the important thing in here is being able to resolve artifacts by whatever taxonomy is meaningful to that use case. And so, and that's kind of when I say package manager, like as I've contemplated this, I've just contemplated if Pulumi has a taxonomy or domain specific application, that they are able to express that within the system, and then so that's what I think of when I think of package managers. I think it's just taxonomy, and I can see in another, I think it came up in really early drafts of the charter, or even before the charter, where we were talking about even redefining something like the Perl specification, where we can reference a remote API, even in dynamic fashion. But I guess that's what I was trying to understand is the package manager, as we're considering this, is it that taxonomy, that domain specific application, or is it that larger system? And I think the answer was both, but just continue to kind of thread that needle here.
All I wanted to say was that I think of OCI from a package manager perspective as the storage API, right? Like if we can get everybody to agree on that storage API, and then if we can get them to agree on some, like Alex was saying, we can't get them to agree on all, but some of the metadata aspect of things, like what's your package name? Let's make sure that's we can agree on. Let's call a package name. Let's come up with an attribute name that matches, things like that. What's your version? What platforms? Whatever. But there's always going to be extra weird stuff in there. Like Python has a bunch of weird little things about many Linux and any Linux, and like they couldn't figure it out, right? So like I've implemented a adapter for both sides, so where we can sync from like PyPy or any other private repo, put it into OCI. Sorry, it's noisy cars out here. Put it into OCI, and then we can also serve up PyPy compatible registry from OCI. So basically added OCI as a transport for Python. And it's pip compatible, that kind of stuff. But in doing that, it raised lots of different interesting questions. It was a good exercise, and it works, but it raised lots of questions that we can have standards around certain things, and so some gaps that are missing in OCI. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I was going to echo that, and Sajay left a comment, which I think is really interesting, like figuring out sort of what the impedance mismatch is between the different package managers and OCI. I think it's going to be an important exercise for us, because when it comes to those domain-specific taxonomies, we want to make sure that we're not sort of leaving out something obvious, right? Like as we try to figure out like how can we represent NPM or PyPy or other package managers in the system, because I think I want to go a step further than what Alex said, which is it's not just the domain-specific taxonomy, but it's also sort of the relationship between these things, right? Whether it's a package, I guess I can say it because it's been mentioned a few times, whether it's a Pulumi package or it's some other package manager. Often these packages have dependencies that aren't necessarily like the SBOM is going to include not just other packages within that ecosystem, but sometimes reference things outside of that ecosystem, an operating system, another tool chain, a C tool chain, for example. And that's going to be the case for our packages and for a lot of others. And I think figuring out that way of referencing packages, or saying that something depends on more than just the immediate sort of in package manager dependencies, and expressing that in some way, or being able to parse the SBOM in some way, that search is meaningful over that. So I can do something like find all of the packages, including the, say, Pulumi packages that might be affected by log4j vulnerability, right? And one of them might indirectly depend on a Java runtime, right? And that's going to be, I think, the real challenge for us, is thinking about that, and looking at adapters like app transport OCI is really interesting.
Yeah, I think dependencies is a super interesting one. And without, wanting to break in complete jail here, this was, I want to be careful, like the reference type thing that we did is not a dependency, it's actually the opposite. And because that was the thing that we had to try to figure out, is how do I add a child to an existing thing without changing the original, right? There's that sealed capacity. But one of the original PRs we had when we started that whole conversation was the ability to do bidirectional. It was loose references, I think it was called. It was number 27, that allowed you to reference things across a repo in a registry. But really the vision of it was a loose connection to something anywhere. For instance, a Perl. It might not be in the same registry. In fact, it might not even be a Helm chart that depends on container images. It's a different media type, right? Well, okay, let me be careful with the word media type there. It's a different content thing. One's a Helm chart that says I'm deploying containers. What's to say that the Helm chart doesn't say I depend on a certain configuration? Or what's to say that a container image doesn't depend on a certain set of packages, which you could argue is an SBOM. But the point is what is the generic way to think about dependencies that are not absolutely positively have to be in that same storage system? And again, I'm recognizing SBOMs as a thing there, but which is an interesting question. If NPM was, as a thing that we know of today, if NPM were to be created today and they wanted to say that this package depends on these other packages, would SBOM be that right format? Or do we need something that's more generic around how to track dependencies? So that's another piece that I could see that this group can define is how can you define dependencies learning from all the way the package managers have done today, so that we can do things such as supply chain patching.
So I told myself I was not going to get into dynamic schema, so I'm not going to do it here. Okay, like not going to do it. So that's yay for self-control, because it's like this is my favorite topic. So thanks for teasing me with it. I would equally tease the working group here. Maybe, yeah. Thank you, Andrew. We've been working together for a while now, so he knows my. Anyway, I would tease the working group here. I think we've kind of whet our appetite for thinking about these problems, and I think that's really what Ram did here is like, let's start thinking about this thing in a structured way. And I wanted to kind of pick on Kyle a little bit here. You work in an academic institution. You in your comment, I'm trying to remember what it was, enumerate storage APIs and looking at the similarities. I'd like to kind of like zoom out on this and kind of go back to the agenda for a second, maybe, and talk about, as we're conducting our research, what are the inputs? How do we process those inputs? And then what do we want the output of that to be? And so I think that Sajay came to this with a use case, which I appreciate. I think everybody maybe has links, resources, existing schemas, use cases, and examples. And I kind of just wanted to kind of frame this as, how do we want to proceed with our research or engage in this research in a way that is driving outcomes, and I think we need to define those outcomes. And then I'll just conclude this thought with Josh has provisioned a space within Google Drive for us that we can consolidate some of those resources in lieu of this our official repository, which we can migrate these to later. So Kyle, I kind of threw you under the bus. I don't know if you have any thoughts there. And then I think Ram's also been thinking about this.
The academic answer is right. You do your lit review first, trying to figure out what's out there. I think we've all kind of said this in various forms, that I think the way forward is we look at the status quo, what's out there. What I was looking at when I was talking about the storage APIs, I was focusing in on, we're not trying to like make a generic package manager, right? We have to be careful with that. We're looking at generic storage API for new package managers. Maybe existing ones could add new transports that support this, whatever. And then what functionality do they need? I think if we start looking at what package managers actually do, some of the big ones, apt, npm, Python, whatever, and maybe look at it at two levels: the level of I just want to install something versus I want to search for a package versus I want to do some higher level thing like figure out all packages that have this vulnerability. We have to figure out what those actions are, and then we could document them. We can go off and kind of take the tasks and document them for different ones, and start thinking about. I think it'll start becoming obvious how they map into OCI, or we'll see the gap as to how they don't map very well, and that's the part that we have to fill with extension APIs or whatever. I don't know. I feel like we divide and conquer on that. That was my thoughts.
Okay. So as far as I'm trying to kind of bring this back to this question, and I seeded this into the agenda. So this is selfish, I guess. Is the input here? Are we saying that the input is the literature? Then it's all these existing references, and then how do we want to consolidate those?
I think the input is a list of, if we want to focus on the package manager problem, which is probably a good place to start. it's obviously a real use case, right? But there are others that we could consider, but maybe we focus on that. And so the input is just a list of package managers, just different names, apt, npm, whatever. And then in this meeting, maybe we can decide on the second box, which is what are we going to do with each of those? Like what information do we need to extract from apt, from whatever, to understand it and how it would fit into our, how OCI could help solve that problem better than they currently do, or solve it at all. And then the output would be the kind of, I don't want to say API, but kind of like what is that storage API that kind of falls out of the problem after you've gone through all of those? That's my thought on the 3 steps.
Steve, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, so this is great because we're talking about, I think we're consolidating on some details on this. And what I'm thinking about is like the framing problem to some extent is, if we think about why does somebody want to come to this group? Why does somebody want to contribute to the group? And why would they come to the group? To see the output of the group. And when I think about it is, there's a bunch of existing package managers out there. For people trying to create something new, where should they go? What are the gaps that might exist across these? Excuse me. And if they're trying to search across them, like, one of the pieces I think is missing across all of them is, and maybe not all of them, but it's certainly missing consistently across them, is a search API to be able to understand things about packages. Some of them have some proprietary ones, their type of package manager. And then from an OCI perspective, each implementation has various proprietary APIs because there was no standard created. But from a scenario perspective, if I'm trying to come up with a new thing, and I'll use Pulumi as an example, because I think it's a convenient way to talk about something generically, like where Helm is tied to containers, Pulumi is around deploying some infrastructure. And Frail, please correct me if I'm not paraphrasing it right. What would they do for that new content type? Where would, do they have to create a new package manager? Could they use one of them? But let me elaborate to a different type. If I'm trying to create an SBOM format or a statements of attestation of quality about existing content, or Vex, or like Vex didn't exist when we started some of the stuff. So whatever the next thing is, where I've got a piece of content that I'm trying to say is about an existing package, that's an interesting problem, because that means you probably want to put it in the package manager of that system. So I love the OCI artifacts approach. We're generalizing this for all different types, but I don't know if I would use that if somebody's trying to add an SBOM to an NPM, for instance. So, or a Vex, or whatever the next thing is. So how could this group help new artifact authors know how they should think about their types? And how do we help the various package managers make their systems more robust to support search and supporting artifacts? And then that kind of frames what you're kind of talking about, Kyle and Alex, of, well, how would you implement those? Here's the storage APIs, here's some schema that you can use to do that.
There's two things come to mind. Steve, can you capture that in the agenda? I was kind of having a hard time summarizing your thought there, and I think it's valuable, and I think we need that recorded.
We also need to allocate people that are note takers at the beginning of the meeting.
I'm terrible at it. I've been trying, and
I appreciate it.
Summarization is not my superpower.
Well, I mean, then the idea is just to delegate to others, not necessarily yourself. So you can help on the facilitation standpoint.
All right, so let me go back and do some notes there.
Aaron, I put I tried to summarize your note here in the agenda, because I think that's also a really good question. And I think that's a good processing point, is as we're doing the schema mappings, we're looking at what's just falling off, what's not mapping at all. And so I think that's a great processing point. And and then I was hoping maybe we could kind of bring this full circle back to Ram's his first stab here, and kind of how does what we've been discussing marry up to the idea of these three ecosystems, or I forget what he framed them as, Kubernetes specific, container specific, and then other. Ram, could you expand on what on maybe
No, yeah,
finding-
because I didn't want to. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, I think search is a good use case actually. So across package managers with whatever is proprietary and things like that, when you have such a large cross section of things, so trying to pick something that is somewhat narrow in scope but is quite useful, I think that is realistic to achieve. Otherwise, we will just be talking in circles. So it's good. I think what Steve is saying is I actually agree with him what he's saying. So let's so if you come up with any package manager, let's split it into two parts. One is what is it that you could standardize on search from all of this stuff, and internally you can store it in any way you like. That is irrelevant. But once you standardize on the search, then it's useful from the consumers of those APIs on at least doing the standardization. That's it. That's all I have to say.
I think search is somewhat hard to talk about as a group right now because we don't know what we're searching on or over, like the fields, right? Like it's all about the fields and the attributes and the schema. And so I think once we lay down in documents what some of these schemas are, what these fields are, start seeing some overlap, start seeing some non-overlap, then we can have lots of discussion about what are you actually searching for and over, and what would the queries be, and those types of things.
I think that's a really neat place to kind of drop this meeting at. So we're in our last 10 minutes, I think, of the meeting window, and I think that kind of goes into our homework, right? So following on this meeting, I'm going to put the link to the Google Drive in there, and I might just put a link to a doc in there where we can kind of like consolidate that list you're talking about. And once we kind of consolidated those known schemas, then maybe we can, I don't know at what point the working group says, okay, we're going to go into the processing phase of this, where we start doing schema mapping, however we want to engage in that, and then kind of go into the other concerns here. Is that a good jumping off point for like the homework here, or does anybody have another approach that any other considerations we want to keep in mind as we conclude this meeting?
I mean, maybe we could think about it as the goal, the baby step is get the list that we want and prioritize it. Like maybe Plumi's at the top, whatever. Like, kind of hash out the list of these are the ones we really want to look at, these are the ones we'd like to look at, these ones exist, but we're not interested in looking at for whatever reason. In other words, figure out what our input is, like going back to the 3 steps.
I don't
know.
Kyle, in conjunction with what you're talking about, having that prioritized list, and this is for the rest of the group too, do we want to maybe have like presentations or other input into these meetings where we talk about people's perspectives on this, maybe outside of existing artifact or package types, but we're talking about like different approaches to search, or I've been using the term like content name resolution. Does anybody have any thoughts about having like carving out a part of these meetings for like presentations or expert witness? Jao, I see your hand up.
I don't want to answer your question. raised my hand because of something different. So I'm just waiting to see if anybody has anything to say to answer your question.
You don't want to be our first expert witness. You got like 5 minutes left.
No, I do have a concern that I'd like to share. So let's imagine that we start with APT and we try to gather like all the schema and everything from APT. What's the benefit for APT for us to have their schema and to have their schema in consideration? Because if we are not going to provide any value to APT, does it really matter that we know what the schema that APT is using have? I do have, so this is my concern, is that we just go around and say like, all the package manager, just let's try to find like all the parameters that are common and go from there. If in reality we might just end up with like 3,000 attributes that are pretty similar, right? But in the end, there's this problem, like even if we make this pretty good, like we can make this search interesting for APT, will ever APT move to an OCI registry as a backend to store their things there? So in some sense, like I'm a little bit afraid about the way we're like planning. I think it's interesting to go and see what exists right now, but at the same time, is if we're not going to solve a problem, if they don't have a problem, we're just adding information to our big bundle of information that might not be relevant at all. That's just my concern.
I think it's a great concern. I think like we already have existing schema mapping strategies across package types. I think that Artifactory does a good job of that. I think there's other systems. I don't know how Nexus handles it, but I'm sure that there's a lot of existing universal package manager schemas that pretty neatly perform the schema mapping and then address the other concerns as far as what falls off. I think what's really important is, let's just say the app never adopts this. I still think that having cognizance of their schema allows us to express dependency relationships across package types, which would be useful to other packages. So while it might not be immediately useful to apt in the short term, I think that being able to express those relationships and dependencies would be beneficial for other package types that might be leveraging components that defined by apt. And then I'd pass it over to Pro.
Yeah, I think first of all, APT is not sort of a monolith, right? There's a lot of sort of implementations of APT, and I think the question is whether or not it's potentially valuable to maybe one of those implementers. Does it make sense for them to either use OCI as a storage backend? Does that simplify some of their operational needs? But also, there's a lot of sort of private implementations of APT, right? I think that's another sort of use case that's really important for the search is, of course, I can find things in Debian's app search or Ubuntu's app search, but I maybe have a private APT that I would like to also be able to search over, and I don't necessarily want to build internal infrastructure to do search over my private packages that I'm distributing for my business. And I think that's sort of generally applicable to all of these other tools. Is it would be wonderful, I think, if we could get all these package managers to move over to OCI, and I think that actually solves a lot of sort of our work. But I think figuring out sort of the interface between these and building the shims or looking at what it takes in order for them to implement the right sort of interface so that we can do search over these interfaces, so that there is a value proposition for APT to adopt this, both for internal and external use cases. I think it's interesting.
So I did have my hand up, and well, we're at the hard time. I think it's a good question. Like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We should probably talk about, do we think the output of this group is to try to convince people to move to an OCI persistence, or we're just trying to provide rich capabilities across them? If some team wanted to move to it because it solved their problem, great. But I don't think, I personally am not thinking we're suggesting that. I'm hoping to just see value put across the existing ones. And
Yeah, I don't think we're focused on like, I think you guys are all saying the right thing. We're not thinking app would jump ship or anything like that. Maybe eventually, but if they wanted to, but that's all up to them. And that's not our goal. Our goal is to like,
Right.
I think our goal should be the use case, the weird use case of like, you know, like Tecton has plugins and Helm has their charts and all, and some bespoke just application developer. I have a new plugin architecture. I want to have cool plugins. Well, I don't want to make a huge package manager like and infrastructure for this. I want to have a infrastructure list. Like there is no infrastructure I have to write, no server side, anything. I can do everything client side in my application, and I can define new plugins, and I can define a plugin, you know, interface, and then I can have people go off and make plugins, push them to OCI, and I can consume them. Right? Maybe I can search them. Like that might be that's like the micro package manager kind of idea. I imagine that being a more compelling argument than these big monster package managers, at least initially.
Yeah, like what I was saying is that my concern is that we might be taking into account things that are really not useful because these big package managers, they will not go into this model, right? So we might be considering like the world and say like, oh my God, we need like these 200 parameters because they are really important for these big things. But in reality, if they are not going to move to this world, does it really make sense for us to be considering them? So like that's just my concern, is that we end up with like such a big surface area that it's going to be pretty hard for us to get to a decision on what are the things that we want to search on, for example.
If I could to kind of wrap up the meeting here, put a pin on this, and I think this is a valid concern. I think that we might find through interview and presentation that there's other approaches than rote schema mappings, and being able to dynamically reference schemas, you know, and not have to account for everything, but just be able to reference those. And so I think that as we go through these exercises, I think that maybe there's different approaches that will kind of lend themselves to I think your concerns are addressing them in ways that maybe schema mapping is not going to. I don't know if that's helpful, but I don't think that schema mapping is the only game in town. So I think it's going to be a hybrid approach personally.
Yeah, I think like we could define some use cases to try to understand like where would this having an OCI storage would benefit somebody, right? And from there, see like, and if it was that case, like what would they need in order to get information that they want, right? Because like I understand it's good for us to have like an idea of what people are currently in need of on all these package managers, but that should just be like a little part where you say, okay, now everybody's his name, so cool. We need to have a name to search on, right? But when we get to specific things like dependencies, how are dependencies marked? Are they a simpler version? Are they like OR dependencies? Are there like, right? Like it just becomes like a lot more complicated, depending like each use case for package manager might be different. But yeah, just calling that out.
Yeah, I agree. In the interest of time, Ram, do you have anything to close this out? Do you want to close this out?
No, that's all I had. Everything. This is good. So overall, I think instead of just documents, it would be great if we have concrete deliverables coming out of this working group.
Yeah, I think.
Can you repeat that, please?
No, I just what I said was if you have concrete working code that is useful to folks coming out of this working group, that would be great. That's all I have to say. So.
Yeah, I think that was the last note left in there, is that output, white paper, design phase, tasks, and so forth. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. So I think I'm going to send out a link within the Slack channel that has the link to the Google Drive. Probably start like a Google Doc that'll just be kind of a collaboration point where we can start shoving links in. If you can just put a little heading on your link to contextualize it and separate it out. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody here in the next session, which should be the second week in August. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you guys have a good weekend.
When do we have the repo to start doing async work yet? Or that's
Not
still
yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Looking forward to
Well,
an async way to continue working. So
Yeah, that's becoming a high priority item now, actually. So
let's get the
we'll get that
chairs
service desk.
elected, and then the chairs can ask.
It's going to be a service desk ticket. I think that's going to be
that's right.
resolved very shortly. So, and then once we have that, this will become a lot easier. But as an interim collaboration point, I'm just going to put that Google Drive up so that we can just have something to shove things into.
Awesome. Thanks, folks.
Cool. Take care, everyone.